Welcome to a short film about crime and punishment, or, as we refer to it, the most depressing and difficult novel we have ever read.
Now, allow me to explain Mr. Dostoevsky. My Russian father labeled this book as a pretty heavy old Russian classic. Dostoevsky himself lived a very difficult life. Born in Moscow in 1821, his family was very religious and encouraged his love for literature. But at an early age, both of his parents passed just 2 years apart. Later, in 1844, he began to pursue writing, but was then sentenced to prison in Siberia for joining an anti-government group. After returning home, he married a couple women, gambled, and published many novels such as The Idiot and The Possessed, all while remaining in poverty. He eventually died in 1881, and many Russians mourned his death. To help understand this confusing individual, let's take a look at the cute little location of 19th century Russia. Allow me to list all of the reasons why this location was absolutely terrible. There was extreme class division thanks to Peter the Great, general skepticism and sickness, and great reforms led by Alexander II. To add to this fun list of Russian cons, the philosophical ideas in this period pioneered by happy fellows such as George Hegel, who loved to ramble about the morality of criminality, haha, that rhymes, and Charles Fourier, who focused on nihilism. Dostoevsky uses these ideas to shape the philosophy in his novels.
Dostoevsky's philosophies remarkably influenced the ideas that encapsulate modern existentialism. In a review article, literary critic Parmer Priyanka explores the influence of Raskolnikov's philosophical ideas surrounding the morality of criminality. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher who pioneered modern existentialist ideas, employs Raskolnikov's idea that superior individuals are someone who can create their own reality and, quote, does what he feels is right, end quote, even if it's not, quote, conventionally moral, end quote.
Also, art in this period was detailed and only for the upper class, while classical music remained popular and folk music was on the rise.
Dostoevsky kept it real during the literary movement of realism and philosophy during the 18th and 19th century. This movement represented reality by portraying normal experiences as they are in real life, with familiar people, like your favorite next-door neighbor, places like the Whataburger you go to every Friday night, and economic classes, especially the lower ones. Realism was the rejection of imaginative idealization in favor of a close observation of outward experiences. Some other well-known realism authors were Henri de Balzac and Mark Twain. Main works during the movement were The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger and Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Now, imagine you're living in St. Petersburg, Russia in the 1860s. Most everyone is struggling in some way. People are struggling financially, physically, emotionally, or all of the above. This is primarily because social and political systems at the time made it pretty impossible to succeed. There is a division so strong between classes that some even spoke different languages. In St. Petersburg, it doesn't really matter how hard you work. The class you are born into kind of defines your future.
Our novel, Crime and Punishment, begins in St. Petersburg in the 1860s. The main character, Raskolnikov, is a former student who is going a little crazy.
He's crazy, poor, unwell, and easily fixated on the crime that he commits.
Raskolnikov regularly wanders the streets, talking to himself. He barely eats, and he has little contact with others.
Dostoevsky utilizes run-on sentences to emphasize Raskolnikov's anxious mental state. When he is thinking to himself, his sentences tend to be at least 2 lines long. Like on page 128 when he rambles on for 7 lines straight. Dostoevsky's syntax displays Raskolnikov's tendency to get lost in his thoughts, bouncing from one thought to another without a pause.
Raskolnikov pawns his father's watch on an old pawnbroker's apartment, and he says to himself that he wants to murder and rob this pawnbroker.
I got murder on my mind. I got murder on my mind.
Then he goes into a pothouse where he meets a drunk named Marmeladov, who talks about his wife and his daughter Sonia, who is a prostitute.
Through characters such as Marmeladov, Dostoevsky utilizes a great amount of repetition to emphasize the chaos within characters' minds as they question every little detail and seek constant reassurance. As he shares his family story, Marmeladov repeats phrases such as, "Do not blame her," page 18, and "Let it be," page 15. With these repeating phrases, the reader is immersed in the crazy mind of Marmeladov, as he is lost in thought and can't seem to piece his life together.
Sonia works as a prostitute to provide for her family because Marmeladov doesn't. She was even kicked out by Marmeladov because of her prostitution.
Raskolnikov eventually leaves the pot house and arrives home. While he was out, he received a letter
We just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
Pulcheria, his mother.
Pulcheria cares for Raskolnikov dearly, prioritizing him over all else and giving him the money she doesn't even have.
In the letter, Pulcheria tells Raskolnikov that his sister Dunya was a governess for the Svidrigaïlovs, but Marfa Svidrigaïlov fires and publicly shames Dunya after thinking she's going to run away with her husband.
Dunya is a strong and independent woman who sacrifices her well-being for Raskolnikov. Dunya loves Raskolnikov very much, but their relationship is tense. While Dunya treats Raskolnikov with nothing but love and empathy, Raskolnikov treats Dunya poorly.
Shortly after, she was proposed to by Luzin, a government official. Later, Raskolnikov is wandering through the Haymarket.
The Haymarket is an impoverished part of St. Petersburg where it's not uncommon to go out in rags during the daytime. Also, criminals, gamblers, and prostitutes tend to gather there. The Haymarket symbolizes disorder for Raskolnikov because it is a physical representation of his chaotic mental state. His consistent return to the Haymarket highlights his inability to escape delirium by his current means. Even when clearing his head, he returns to madness as if by fate.
In the Haymarket, he hears that Lizaveta, the sister of the pawnbroker, will be out of the apartment the next day. Believing that this conversation is fate, Raskolnikov decides to follow through with his murderous plan.
Here's Johnny!
The next day, Raskolnikov goes to the pawnbroker's apartment and pretends to pawn a cigarette case. He then kills the pawnbroker with the blunt end of an axe, steals a few items in her purse, then kills Lizaveta when she happens to walk in. However, he is almost caught by two men also wanting to pawn items, so he has to run out of the building. Out of guilt, he buries most of the stolen items under a rock. He wanders into his old friend Razkumikin's apartment.
Razkumikin is Raskolnikov's only friend, taking care of him for the majority of the novel.
Later, when he's wandering around again, Raskolnikov sees that Marmeladov was crushed under a wagon wheel. After carrying him back to his apartment, Marmeladov dies. Pulcheria and Dunya come to Petersburg. Then, Raskolnikov is called into the office of Porfiry, the investigator. Porfiry proceeds to play mind games with Raskolnikov about the murder, when Nikolai, the painter from the apartment, comes in confessing the murder. This confuses everyone, and Raskolnikov leaves.
Because of the mind games Porfiry plays on Raskolnikov, the relationship between the two characters is a tense one.
Unable to further handle his guilt, Raskolnikov confesses his murders to Sonia. Raskolnikov is later visited by Porfiry, who has psychological evidence that Raskolnikov is indeed the murderer. Porfiry graciously gives Raskolnikov a couple of days to think about his options, which are to either kill himself or confess. Raskolnikov knows his time is coming to an end, so he says goodbye to Pulcheria and confesses to Dunya, who encourages him to confess to the police. He has been sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Siberia. Razkumikin eventually marries Dunya, and Pulcheria dies of delirium. The narrator implies that Raskolnikov is able to come to terms with his guilt.
Raskolnikov's inner conflict, which is the main conflict of the book, significantly affects his interactions with other characters. Because of his inability to cope with the emotions surrounding his murder, Raskolnikov pushes everyone away to the point where they suspect that he has fallen into madness.
Let's talk about thieves!
As noted by literary critic Jamie Curran, Raskolnikov's actions contain within them a Marxist critique of the corrupting power of wealth, demonstrating the overall theme of wealth versus poverty. Another important theme within Crime and Punishment is that of complex family relationships, as seen through both Sonia and Dunya. As written by Elizabeth Blake, Sonia felt the need to act in self-sacrifice to alleviate the sufferings of her family, thus showing Dostoevsky's use of a complex family relations as the theme and how familial relations can lead to self-sacrifice. There you have it, Crime and Punishment in a nutshell, brought to you by me, Kate, Tasha, and Natalie. Now that we have gone through the general summary of Crime and Punishment with some additional analysis, here's Tasha's mom saying something in Russian as requested by Miss Jones.
Потому что это дело очевидное, бормотал он про себя.